Okay, and we're cool. It's great. All right. I believe we are live. All right. I see you, Nathan. Welcome back to the Common Cause. We were having a little bit of difficulties there with the 30-second intro video, just wanting to loop and loop constantly. My name is Carson Carpenter. And again, I'm the host of the Common Cause. And today we have a special episode in the morning. It is not at a late time at night, like at 10 p.m. Eastern. And it is a January 6th special episode. And it is the 5-year anniversary of January 6th, which is something that I still can't believe. I can't believe we're 5 years after that day and everything that it meant and all the hell really all of us were put through regarding that, dragged through the mud. President Trump was indicted because of a lot of things that were happening on January 6th. And then a lot of the federal agents that were there at the Capitol on that day just made it entirely confusing. A lot of people were distraught towards the government at that time. A lot of people didn't understand the ramifications of what was going on at that time. And obviously, looking back 5 years later, the Democrats and the left are still dragging it, and they're still dragging Republicans through the mud for it. So obviously, we'll talk about that because it's a special January 6th stream, and we're streaming to multiple platforms. And a few of the Common Cause episodes we will do like this, where we will stream to other platforms like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and of course to our Kick, which you can see on the ticker and above me for the links to all of those social medias and to where the show is primarily hosted on Kick. But regarding the news of the past week in Venezuela, there were some developments that I saw last night, and I just want to dive into them. There is a interior minister leader in Venezuela that is essentially trying to lead a military coup. And there were conflicting reports last night about if it was true, if there was a opposition military leader in Venezuela that was trying to take over the acting president, which was determined by a Venezuelan court, not really determined by the United States, which is really the only power player that matters at the moment, especially with Maduro and everything that happened there. Delcy Rodriguez apparently was going to get cooed last night. There were anti air missiles being shot up in the air above Caracas, Venezuela. There was just chaos on the streets outside the presidential palace there in the capital city. And a lot of people were posting on Twitter that there was already a civil war beginning. The United States denied any involvement with this coup attempt, is what it looks like. I still don't know the answer. Obviously, we were monitoring the situation on Twitter, and I'm sure Marco Rubio and all those guys were probably doing the same, which is pretty funny because when the first invasion or the first, kidnapping of Maduro basically happened, Marco and Pete Hegseth and all those guys had Twitter on in the background on their screen, which I thought was pretty funny because, kind of looks like one of us at the end of the day. And going back to that point, the Venezuelan, I think, leader of the Air Force or something was using flight radar to look at the US aircraft. And I don't think he knows, but you can just turn off the transponder pretty easily for those military aircraft, especially in the United States. So, anyway, getting back to that point, though, it looked like in Caracas last night there was going to be a coup d'etat. And it turns out we still don't know. We still don't know if that military interior minister is trying to lead something. He is known as one of the most violent criminals, one of the most violent government officials out of anywhere in the world. He has a $25 million bounty to his head, I believe, by the DEA for narco terrorism. So the same stuff that Nicolas Maduro is being charged for, which he pled not guilty yesterday, which in that New York Southern District indictment, it lays out pretty clearly that him and his wife are going to be guilty. But anyway, pivoting back to the civil war back in Venezuela, the potential civil war, we still don't know what's happening in Venezuela, by the way. We don't know if there's going to be a leader installed. We don't know if it's going to be Machado, which won the Nobel Peace Prize this year, if you can remember that. We don't know who the next leader in Venezuela is going to be. And when there's $18 trillion of oil, we would hope that we would have some type of plan regarding that. But it just doesn't look like there is any. It looks like we were going to go in and essentially run the country, but in the following days, we still don't have a plan of how we are going to run the country. In the following days, we still have no idea who the favorite for the next leader of Venezuela could be. And this could lead to problems for the Trump administration because of looking back at the Monroe Doctrine. It says that you don't want anyone in your hemisphere that's going to inhibit the ability of the United States to conduct control over the Western Hemisphere. And so the taking of Maduro doesn't go against the Monroe Doctrine. It actually is reinforced in it because of the relationship and the ties that Maduro and Venezuela had to China, especially regarding that oil. So I don't think anything there can be construed as illegal or anything except liberals just crying in their basements, essentially saying, well, you know, the way that we kidnapped him was just wrong. You know, the way that we did it, you know, Trump going out and just saying that we took him was just wrong. But the actual principle of the argument still stands. It was the correct decision to go in and get Maduro. And we've been wanting to do this forever. Chuck Schumer went on cable television 3 or 4 years ago, you know, subsequently right after January 6th too, which he probably compared Maduro and Trump. It's pretty safe to say that, I'm sure. And Schumer went on the news and said Trump needs to go in and take out Maduro, or he should have during his term. And then now he's just done a total 180, just like every Democrat has whenever Trump does something. It's really mystifying that some human can just do that to a group of people. But looking back at that entire situation, this was a very favored decision. It was very favored across the board. I don't think there would be a lot of people that would be against kicking out this dictator and seizing the oil in Venezuela. And, you know, except the people that I mentioned. And so looking at this entire situation, there will be a problem if we do not go in and become a force that is going to take over the country, or at least lead to another force like Machado taking over the country. Because if Venezuela goes into civil war, there's a case at international levels, at federal levels, that there is a case against war crimes against President Trump because of basically instigating a civil war. You know, the UN would not be on Trump's side regarding that. And there's just a lot of things that could go down in Venezuela that could turn the tide very wrong for the United States. Now, what I think the United States should do is obviously they should put Machado in charge. It wouldn't be very hard. In fact, they had an election last year where Machado won. Machado won, and it was a no-brainer. But that entire time, you know, Maduro was having the military under his control, having a majority of the government under his control, and we didn't even recognize the government. So that's where the problem comes into play, is how can we recognize a leader who won an election of a government that we don't recognize, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, we should just put Machado in charge. Well, theoretically, we should, because obviously she won an election. Obviously, she is a pretty good peacekeeping force in a general sense. But legally, we can't necessarily do that. And I think it would be the wrong decision to do that at the end of the day, because if we start recognizing leaders who won elections of governments that we don't recognize, then we're going to start recognizing a lot of different things that just don't hold same weight and same precedent. So, especially with a third world country like Venezuela. So, I would have to say, regarding going forward in the future, the U.S. needs to step in and pick a leader, and it needs to pick it quickly, or we need to temporarily run the country for potential 6 to 8 month period until we can ensure that the infrastructure doesn't crumble, that we can ensure that the country is going to be able to run itself, that the government could become more legitimate. And Delcy Rodriguez fled to Moscow. She fled to Russia when Maduro got captured. And then now she wants to be the president of the country. That sounds pretty cowardly, to run a country, but you fled it less than 36 hours before. And that's just a simple no-brainer of, she was supporting Maduro's regime, right? She was supporting the drug trafficking. She was supporting all of this stuff. She allowed it to go through the government more on the policy side instead of Maduro being like the commander in chief on the military side. So Delcy Rodriguez is not any bit more innocent. So where does that lead us? That leads us with the two biggest leaders, which both happen to be women in Venezuela. That's interesting enough. But getting past that point, going into the future of Venezuela, we have this guy who's an interior minister who's waving knives on the streets, who's standing with paramilitary troops outside the palace, saying he's not going to give up control. He's not going to stop. He's not going to make it any easier for the United States. So the United States has put us in a position, essentially, where we can go in and we can be a peacekeeping force. We can be a force in that way. I don't think that's going to work, though, at the end of the day, because you're dealing with a country that could very simply go into a civil war. When you have $18 trillion under your feet, it makes it very easy to get very violent very quickly. And we saw that in Iraq. And just because we took Maduro in the middle of the night, just because he's facing justice in the Southern District of New York, doesn't change the fact that 30 million Venezuelans are running under a pseudo government now and are essentially being led by no one. The United States has claimed to be the leading force in that area, but I haven't seen any movements. I haven't seen any factions. I haven't seen anything on the United States part that is going to refine that infrastructure for Venezuela. And they're a country that needs infrastructure very badly. So Venezuela is very complicated, and it has an option to get very out of control very quickly. But like I said, my ulterior kind of solution to this would be, we need to go in 6 to 8 months and just really refine their government in a way that we didn't do in Iraq, in a way that we didn't do in Afghanistan, in a way that's a lot different. And I think it would be setting precedent in the Monroe Doctrine, is you have to be able to retain stability for the United States to have complete interests in the Western Hemisphere. I think that's something that is way different from the Middle East. I think that's something that's way different from Europe. I think it's way different from Asia because, one, they're way closer to us. Two, they have a huge amount of oil that we actually have the right to. I do agree with President Trump with that, is Maduro was withholding it, and withholding it very badly. We had a lot more of an open trade negotiations and deals with them back in the 70s and 80s when we were having the oil crisis going on, and Iran was basically stopping giving us oil and making everyone pay $5 a gallon, which back in 1970 was basically a down payment on a house. So it was just a really different time. But now looking at it, it's more of an economic prosperity element. It's more of an economic opportunity element when getting the oil, because even President Trump said, we might keep some of it, we might not. We'll probably sell it off to a lot of the other countries. But I don't know if President Trump knows this. Venezuela has some of the heavier crude oil in the world. It has some of the oil that the United States is looking for, because when you do fracking, especially in the oil fields in Texas and North Dakota and South Dakota and even in Canada, it tends to be a lighter oil. It has to go through a special refinery process to be made usable, essentially. And in Venezuela, they have a very heavy crude oil that's under their feet. And that is very useful for the US. And we probably would actually use a big majority of it. We probably would sell off a lot of our own oil, which actually would be a benefit to us because we're the United States. We'll sell it at a way bigger premium price than oil from Venezuela would be. So, just regarding the whole entire Venezuela situation, there's a lot that can be thrown into chaos. There's a lot that can be up in the air of where this could go. And again, my solution would be a 6 to 8 month control in the region. I'll even make Marco Rubio the president of Venezuela, right? Their national language is Spanish. I'm sure Marco would fit right in. He has about 6 other jobs right now. So, he can make it a 7th at this point. But I think the U.S. needs to be very strategic about this. And I think that will develop in the next coming days or the coming weeks. But I think the 2 options that you cannot see, obviously, are Delcy Rodriguez becoming president and the opposition interior minister of the country, who is one of the most violent narco terrorists in the world. That's something I don't even understand, is when we went in and got Maduro, did we really not think that this guy might make a gun for the top dog position in Venezuela, especially if we're playing this kind of neutral card, kind of this, we'll kind of go in, we'll take the oil, but we won't provide any infrastructure to actually rebuild your government, which we haven't recognized in a long time. And then right after that, he is gunning for the top position. He had a $25 million reward that was half of Maduro's reward. And we didn't think to get this guy. Now, I know Maduro was obviously the top target, but this guy is going to be an issue. So we'll see. And the reason why I refer to this guy as this guy, because I don't know how the hell to say his name. It's like a whole bunch of jumble of letters. I don't even know. It's probably a Spanish name, but that's the situation unfolding in Venezuela. I'm sure you saw it on Twitter last night. It was very interesting. I thought the golden age wasn't here, and then, it could be back, and then it just left again. So it's kind of how it's felt this entire administration. They said the golden age starts now. And then the golden age, just gets canceled every once in a while. It just gets canceled because, we're either selling out to Israel or, we actually aren't deporting as many people as we said we were. Apparently 1.9 million people self-deported themselves, but I feel like that's a little bit of a Looney Tunes number, because when I still go to McDonald's, I still have all these illegal workers taking my order. Like this morning, I went to a McDonald's and I couldn't get a coffee because their app wasn't working, which McDonald's really needs to fix that, because I get a 99-cent coffee, right? Which is how much you should pay for coffee, okay? Especially if it's dirty dishwater like it's from McDonald's, okay? They just, put 3 pumps of whatever, syrup into it, which is probably really bad for you. But anyway, and then, you drive through, I was not a happy camper, honestly. The app wasn't working. It was freezing. They need to fix that. And I drive through, I look at the workers, and there's still a bunch of illegal immigrants that are working at all these fast food places, at all these places. They barely speak a lick of English. I want to see real change in my daily life, right? I want to be able to go out in public and be, breathe some fresh air and just be like, this is what 10 million deportations smell like, right? I don't want to have to go out in public and see an illegal immigrant overdosing on fent inside the bus station little canopy thing, right? Like you sit on those hard benches that are homeless proof. They have the bars on them. And then, the bus stop with the steel top on it. Yeah. I don't want to see people doing fentanyl in those. I want to see, a nice dapper looking gentleman on his little laptop getting work done, doing something for this country. Right. So, And speaking of public transportation, we could go off into a tangent about that, okay? Because that is just a product of the Civil Rights Act, okay? They are quite literally okay, so public transportation was literally a product of pushing around EBT recipients, right? Because when you when you look back at the civil rights legislation, obviously there was stuff with, Rosa Parks back in the day, and there was stuff, regarding that whole area. If you look back at a lot of the civil rights legislation, it was actually to improve a lot of the welfare programs, right? I'm not telling you something you probably already don't know, but especially public transportation in these city municipalities is really due to a lot of the Civil Rights Act on the federal level. So they would get a lot more federal funding if they implement a lot of these stupid programs. Like I'll be driving in the morning and these buses get in the way and they throw on their hazards right before the stop signs, right? Which if I were to park there or anybody else, you're getting a ticket, and there's probably a traffic camera, or all these things are getting you. Some traffic made is some social workers going to come over and just give you a $500 ticket, probably throw you in jail for 10 days. But then if you go out and rape someone, you get, released same night in those cities. That's usually how it tends to be. So anyway, when talking about those things, they always put the hazards on right before the stop signs. And I'm just like, wow, what benefit did this do to any of us? What benefit does this EBT pusher bus essentially do to any of us, right? And every time I drive by that bus, there's a bus driver on his phone. Who knows what he's doing on his phone? Probably a government paid for phone at that point. And then I see like 5 people in there. One's overdosing on some type of drug. The other looks like an honest person. Okay. And you know what? I'm not saying all of these buses are EBT pushers, but there's some good, honest people that are riding the public transport. But the byproduct of public transport was due to the Civil Rights Act. Okay. And so, people are like, oh, we don't have as much public transport as Europe. We don't have as much blah, blah, blah. And it's like, because Europe implemented it in a way that didn't incentivize minorities riding on public transportation. Okay. That's just the first issue there. Anyway, I could keep going on. We'll probably do a show about public transport, honestly. It grinds my gears, okay? And there's a way that we could do it where it actually would be useful, okay? That you wouldn't be driving, on the street and there's like tram tracks in the middle of it. And then when you stop at a restaurant that's right next to those tram tracks, you don't have druggies coming over and harassing you for food as soon as you walk out of the restaurant on a date, There's a lot of things that we could do to implement a cleanup with public transport, and it wouldn't be as incentivized, especially being tied in with the Civil Rights Acts. And when you see Congress do a lot of their budgetary stuff, they tend to, in those budget bills, you see like $350 million for condoms to Hamas and all that type of stuff. You see the public transport stuff really putting that same thing, another 250 million to dildo exhibits in the Louvre, like all that type of weird stuff, right? And then you see the public transport stuff for Los Angeles, you see the public transport stuff for in New York. You see all of that stuff is thrown in with a bunch of that stupid crap. So to legitimize it in a way, which is weird, right? I mean, for the Democrats, I'm sure it does. For the Republicans, most of the time they probably don't even read the bills. But yeah, they always throw it in with that stupid stuff. So anyway, we'll go into that another time. But I think we know the real reason why we're doing the show right now. Okay. And that's because it's the 5th anniversary of January 6th. And, honestly, thinking back about it, it's still crazy how much, like, I don't want to sound like, Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh or any of those guys and be like, the left hates this, the left, blah, blah, blah. But it is true. The left really milks January 6th until it's dry, but they don't even milk it till it's dry. They're milking a bull at this point because they don't even know what they're talking about when they talk about January 6th, right? It's like they're milking a bull. They don't even know what type of animal it is. They don't know it can't produce that type of milk, okay? And so when Democrats talk about January 6th. They frame it as 9/11 2.0. They frame it as the worst attack on democracy ever. I'm not again telling you anything that you don't know, but when you talk about this subject, Democrats will still use it as a bargaining chip in the Big 26. Okay. There's still people that go on cable news and talk about January 6th like they were a personal victim of it, even though they lived in the city of Washington or lived somewhere else in the country and didn't even have a clue what was going on that day. But obviously, we know there were federal agents in the crowd, right? There should have definitely been more security for a 1.5 million person gathering in the city of DC, right? I think that's a no brainer. Obviously, Pelosi rejected the National Guard, all that stuff. But the biggest thing that I will say about January 6th, looking back in 2026, is that when you see these online debates, you see Dean Withers, you see Parker, you see all these guys that, quite frankly, need to hop on testosterone. You see that they still whine about January 6th like a ex-girlfriend whines about their time with their ex, right? They just keep talking about it. They just keep talking about it. And then with an ex, they usually tend to make up some things that were happening during a relationship, right? Like, he didn't buy me this, he didn't do me that. That's what Democrats do at January 6th is, the further we get away from it, the more they embellish it, right? They say it's the second 9/11. They say it's basically like the fourth plane hitting or whatever. They really embellish this whole like it's almost in their eyes a theological argument, right? It's down to a level where if you don't agree with it, like you're denying an entire way of life. You're denying it's like some canon event for them. And so when you look at January 6th and what it means now, they look back and they use the buzzword democracy, right? We've heard that a billion times. But my biggest argument with January 6th was no officers died on the day of January 6th. That is an objective fact. I don't know how people can get away with saying, oh, actually, there were 5 officers that died on the day of January 6th. No, they died about 2 or 3 weeks later, sprinkled throughout. And that was because a lot of them had mental issues. A lot of them had other issues. Who knows? It could have been federal agents, something happening to them. We don't know. But the only person that died in the Capitol that day was Ashley Babbitt. There's still a blood stain on the ground in the Capitol. I've seen it myself. There's still stuff like that that is just reminiscent of the day. And it was the people who actually went into the Capitol that had to pay the price for it. All of the lawmakers were out of there about 2 or 3 hours, before people actually started getting into the chamber. Pelosi was probably already at her compound outside of Washington, managing the situation, basically egging it on to be worse. I think we know that as a fact because her daughter was filming some stupid documentary that I'm sure no one's going to watch if it even came out. And in the documentary, I'm sure it paints her as a hero. And she was on the phone and talking to some people, everybody can talk on the phone and talk to people. Okay. So Pelosi didn't do anything heroic that day. I think we obviously know that. But when it comes to actually asserting our constitutional duty, let's dive into that argument, right? Because the people on January 6th, you can argue the way that they conducted it was unprofessional and, the wrong way that they should have done it. But then if you actually look in our nation's constitution of what the rights the people have to our government, I think it's pretty simple that they do have a right to hold our government accountable if they truly thought that something was wrong. And me and Strider were talking about this all day yesterday of if those people truly thought, like 100% thought that they were doing the right thing, that their government was being tyrannical, that they were trying to take away their power, take away their vote, take away millions of people's votes, taking away, committing election fraud, throwing election ballots in the boxes and throwing them in at 2 a.m. in the morning. If they truly thought about that and truly thought about it as their objective truth, it states in the Constitution, it is their constitutional right to stand up against any tyranny in that way. So whose right is it for the government to be like, no, those people should be thrown in prison. Those people should be absolutely essentially martyred in their own right of being prisoners of an insurrection in our country. And what right does it get in the Constitution of an insurrection? I don't think the founding fathers even explicitly mentioned that. I'm sure there's some area in there that's just like vaguely talking about if there is a revolution or an uprising, what the government shall do. But January 6th is a unique case where if those people actually thought that, which I assume they did because they served prison time, then they actually did what was constitutionally brought upon them. So again, that's my argument for January 6th. And a lot of people are going to be like, wow, that's really riveting content, like Nathan thinks in the chat. But it's just true. It had to be said because a lot of people on these daytime televisions and all these other shows that are, especially like these debates with Dean Withers and all these guys, they really try to underscore people's actual intellectual right to go against their government. And Dean Withers is a perfect example of that. He loves collectivism. He loves the route of, oh, okay, if the majority likes it, then everybody should like it because that's how a democracy works. Well, we're not even close to a democracy, one. If you try to emulate a democracy in a constitutional republic, you see extreme division. It's not very hard to see, right? It's a product of what has been happening for the past 10 years. It's this one side is trying to push this democracy message because they think it's favorable with the people, which I'm sorry, it's not. 80% of the people in this country would have no clue what's going on with our government, right? Because it's one big city on the East Coast that is ran by the insiders, right? So you're telling me someone in Cheyenne, Wyoming, or a majority of people in Cheyenne, Wyoming are going to be like, wow, I'm keeping up with HR 6967. Like, no, they're not doing that. Okay. They're not keeping up with everyday way of life, with our government, with everything regarding that. That's not demeaning the people. It's actually elevating their intellect, right? Because I feel like if you're constantly in this state of mind, you become essentially very pessimistic about your life, about your future, about your God, about everything, right? And you start to see that with Dean Withers. You start to see that with, again, all these guys, Harry Sisson, Parker, Adam Mockler is a huge example of that. He's very pessimistic. He's very argumentative. I'm sure he's not a very pleasant guy to be around outside of that. I don't know. Maybe he could be, but just regarding all of that stuff, January 6th is like their canon event, right? That's their 9/11 politically, because that's got you there. Oh, political violence. You want to talk about political violence? Let's talk about January 6th. And then you mentioned, okay, there's violent rhetoric on both sides. I think everybody knows that. But which one actually leads to more death? Is it when the left uses it or when the right uses it? I think it's when the left uses it, obviously, because Charlie Kirk got shot, Trump got shot. All of these political figures are getting shot. One was killed. One was spared by about a half inch. And then January 6th, really? Ashley Babbitt's blood is still on the floor of the Capitol. Those officers that killed themselves days later, we don't know the motive. We don't know their motive of why they ended their life. I don't remember seeing too many suicide notes being left or anything regarding that. So do we even know it was regarding January 6th? I think that's just an assumption. And if we're going to base stuff off of assumption, there's a lot of things we could assume about the left. Okay. We can assume a lot of things because of the events that have transpired, but we actually give them grace. Okay. And that's because we're morally higher standing than a lot of them tend to be because we're more religiously based. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. Sorry. I was reading the chat. I'm trying to get more involved with the chat, okay? And the left is gay, the right is gayer, but right. Okay. Yeah, honestly, yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. I want to talk about this. There's a lot of conservatives that are closeted gays in the conservative movement. Like I don't know if anybody has been realizing that, but there are a lot of gay people in the conservative movement. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad, but they always tend to paint the Democrats as being gay or pro trans or pro, just basically not being based. Okay. Just being like a weird way of life, a different way of life. Right. And yet the conservative movement has a lot of gay leaning people. So, and they tend to have a lot of power, which is an interesting dynamic. So, this side that claims to be very religiously based, very evangelical, very, I'm going to spread the Lord to everybody, the Bryce Crawford level of Christianity of, if I see someone out, I'm going to make sure I have my camera on, my Kick live stream on, and I'm going to pray for him, that type of showing optics of the Lord, but then actually working with people that tend to a lot of the time not align with your vision of the Lord, is something that's very interesting. And yes, you should obviously compromise when you're working with people on different visions that aren't just yours. But also when it comes to political discourse and ideology and even theology, there has to be some level of semblance to agree on, right? And I feel like that's why you see such a huge split in the conservative movement, is because a lot of times that just doesn't come together or happen. So, and that could be because there's insiders that are trying to divide that. And I think you can assume who those insiders might be. But Bryce Crawford, yeah, interesting guy. But I would say going back to this entire January 6th obsession, looking back 5 years from now, I don't really care about January 6th. The left still loves it. There's even people on the right that still talk about it. I don't think it's a very historically impactful event. It didn't really change much, clearly. Biden still ended up winning. Biden still ended up screwing up Afghanistan, which we need to take a lesson for regarding Venezuela so that we don't screw up that as well. And then in 2023, going into Israel, going into Ukraine, it really didn't change the trajectory of it much. It didn't at all. And so the whole January 6th obsession is a very easy argument to fight. It's a very easy argument to go against because you can bring up the political violence that they've inflicted upon the right. You can bring up a lot of things that just are just truly not relevant anymore 5 years later. So I'm going to wrap that up because I don't want to keep talking and droning on about January 6th. That was a big portion of the show. But, we have Venezuela. We have the anniversary of January 6th. We have a lot of things that are coming up. We have, obviously, regarding Ukraine, hopefully that war will end pretty soon. We have just a lot of things in the news right now. I think there was some more bombing of the Houthi rebels this morning. When you look at Trump's foreign policy, he's being painted as the war president because it's not the peace president, the war president, because he's bombing so many countries, right? He's bombing Yemen. He's bombing Venezuela. He's bombing the Middle East, basically. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is a lot of the countries in the Middle East. Lebanon, Jordan, there's been strikes in those countries. Iraq, I think, obviously, Iran. Afghanistan, there might have been one. I don't know for sure. Someone could fact check me probably after the VOD comes out. But just this whole administration has really been bombing targeted targets, essentially. But it's ruining the narrative of being a peace president, of being a peacetime president, because there are bombs and missiles flying, right? So, again, I think with President Trump, he just really has to really just take care of Venezuela, right? He has to take care of Venezuela, wrap that up very quickly. Man, it is hot in here. Holy shit. Sorry. Gosh, it is warm in here. Currently in a hotel room, clearly, as you can tell. This isn't the normal Common Cause setup. It is getting very warm in here, probably because I've been talking for 40 minutes nonstop. But getting back to that point, I don't even know where the hell I was going with it. But again, I kind of want to lay out some more of the future. Oh, okay. We got an interesting chat here. What do you think of the separation of church and state? I feel like religious beliefs are needed in government, particularly Christian, but that doesn't mean we're going to have Sunday service in government, you know? People don't realize their morality came from Christianity. And if we move away from that, it's an issue. Yeah, absolutely. I believe, the founding fathers stated it. Separation of church and state should have been done with our law system, not necessarily how we conduct our overall system, right? So, what I mean by that is obviously our laws should not be basically determined by a theological view, right? So, when you make laws, obviously there's going to be some exceptions to that, like don't murder other people, don't commit a lot of these things. But when it comes to traffic signs and traffic tickets and minor crimes and all that, there's no integration of church and state there, right? And so when it comes to actual carrying out of business, right, with a lot of these agencies, right, especially in schools, right, you have to look at that. Schools were under the Department of Education. I still believe they are, even though we were trying to defund and get rid of the Department of Education. That was a branch that wasn't there at the beginning, right? So in the typical sense of separation church and state, you could look at the Department of Education as really just an offshoot of the executive branch, right? And so when you look at it that way, really, if there is scripture on the wall in a school and you have all these people crashing out about it and saying, I don't want good morals and authorities taught to my children. I want a gay trans flag on the wall. And I want, the 10 commandments of how to be gay and trans on the wall. Okay. That's essentially what their almost argument is, right? Is they say, no, take down the 10 commandments, but let's give them trans books in the library, which, let's be real, are kids even reading this these days, right? They're always on social media. They're always on these platforms. Like, I'm sure if I went to a school now, which I don't plan on going to a school anytime soon, I would see that a lot of the kids are probably not reading. I've heard a lot of the kids are not even learning phonetic spelling and sounding out words. So basically, when you learn how to say words, you look at the combination of letters to actually see, how could I pronounce this? And you know what? You get a few wrong every once in a while. Okay. I still do. But now kids are apparently having to learn, like, just looking at the word, they have to know how to say it, right? So, like, let's look at Phoenix, for example, a city in the southwestern United States, right? If you were a younger kid learning how to actually say stuff, you would probably say it wrong, right? And then you learn, hey, no, because of the O and the E and the I and the whatever, you have to say it differently. Now kids are expected to learn, like, the letters separately, right? Like pronunciations. And then they have to put it all together in a mumbled mess of how to pronounce it. So kids sound retarded when they speak today. That's just true. Like, I'll talk to someone that's younger and, the Gen Z stare is a thing, right? I do it every once in a while. If there's a whole bunch of people yapping to me, I'll tune out a lot of it. But then you talk to these younger kids, like these younger generations of people, and they're just like very low IQ. I'm sorry, but they're very low IQ. And that's because of the system that's been put around them, right? The schools have become dumber, right? They're focusing on, let's get the 10 commandments out of the classroom, but let's actually push, how to have very explicit sexual intercourse, right? Like, that makes no sense. So, regarding back to that, yeah, this whole next generation is cooked. Not to be very pessimistic about it, but I mean, with this current trajectory, we need to do something about it. We need to fix it. And I mean, they say, like, the sounding out of words or something was racist, and that's why they had to change it, right? And they don't ever give you any grounds, any basis to any of it. It's frankly retarded. So, yeah, we're gonna have a next generation of retarded people, I would have to say. I would say high schools are still pretty solid. I mean, I wasn't there that long ago. Especially charter high schools, they're very good in not dealing with a lot of that stupidity. And then you get, like, the most retarded chuds that end up becoming these teachers in the public schools, right? and this is a hot take because a lot of people don't like attacking the teachers, right? Because yeah, they have a harder job. They have to go to work. They have to work 6 months out of the year, and then they have to take a vacation and not work with children all day, and then sit in their classroom and cut out some like ABC stuff and hang it on the walls. I get that, but obviously that was a little sarcastic. And then, but when talking about like the entire situation with teachers, a lot of these teachers literally went to college, they got a teaching degree, they worked a job for 5 years, and then they became a teacher or they were a substitute teacher, right? Um, if you go back and look in the 1800s, or you go back and look at professors, the difference in elevation of education was so vastly different compared to now. The pipeline basically is you get some younger Gen Z girl that's super libtarded out. Okay. She believes free abortion on demand. She believes in all of these things that are just free and easy, basically weed everywhere, abortions everywhere. And then they get into a pipeline of, okay, I'm going to go to college for 6 years. I'm going to goon the first 2 years of them away just by drinking, doing drugs, all of this stuff, just not being very productive. And then they say, okay, I'm going to lock in. I'm actually going to learn how to teach, children. And then they like actually don't lock in because they actually weren't locked in the entire time. And then you get these very like half-ass teachers that come out of the pipeline. So then usually get them working a 2 or 3 year job somewhere else at a bank, or even they'll just get pipelined into the schools, like being a TA or being a being an assistant for, the library or whatever else. And then they just essentially get promoted into being a teacher. And a lot of times you see with these teachers is they take the easy option out, right? Is they don't actually make any of the education for the children anymore. That's what used to be tailored, right? Elevation of education is one, you get teachers that were actually qualified. Maybe they ran a small business or actually had a skill before coming and teaching other students. They didn't just come out of, college expecting to know the entire world because, I just got out of college and I don't know jack shit at the end of the day, just going to be honest. And when you see these teachers, back in the day compared to now, they used to be very qualified. Now they're very underqualified. Okay. We all know that. But then you also see a general laziness with these teachers at the highest level you've ever seen. But then they expect their students to output way more than they're putting in, right? And yeah, I get they're getting paid $50K a year. They're not getting paid the glitz and glammy lifestyle, but you should love what you do, right? You should have some honor and integrity in it. And a lot of people, especially in the education sector, just don't have that, right? They just don't have that moxie to them. So then you get these teachers, right? They're like, oh my gosh, my job is so hard. I have to go to school with children for 6 months and teach. I will give them that. That's a skill. Being able to go up and talk in front of people and do it in a cohesive way that actually goes to the level of the students, that's a masterclass. But then you have the other 4 months or whatever amount of months I was saying, it depends wherever you are in the US, and you have no students. You're just working administratively with your colleagues, gearing up for the next year, buying big pencils and, rulers and glue sticks and all that stuff. And you get a chill time. Okay. And you get to live a pretty simple lifestyle, but one you should take pride in, right? You're raising the next generation. I would hope you take pride in that. And with these teachers, they just, today was so hard. I had to go tell a kid to stop playing cool math games. And then after that, I had to go find a free PDF template of the times tables that they're going to be taught today. And then I had to have a student go pass out the sheets of paper. And then I made them sit there for an hour and learn their timetables. And then I had to go dismiss them. And then I had to go do bus duty. Like, I'm sorry, but I am only going to give you respect in that sense if you're going to have integrity for your work. And I don't think that's an outrageous take. I don't think there's going to be comments on here being like, oh my gosh, you're the worst person to ever exist. You're the worst person to ever live. Because I said, you have to have integrity in your work. And the job can be pretty easy, especially if you make it easy. And that should be something to the good teachers. That should mean something to the good teachers. If you're a good teacher, you're a science teacher, and you go out and make a model rocket and you blow something up with your students and actually teach them some real science, applause to you, because that's actually doing something useful. But then if you have an English teacher who's like, okay, class, we're going to read The Great Gatsby, and I'm going to make every other student popcorn read, and I'm going to sit here on my phone playing Brawl Stars and Clash Royale. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, you're not going to get any respect from me. Okay. Because there's a lot of people in this world that work their ass off, and that's not doing it. So, yeah. And teachers, that's another thing. Teachers are trying to be influencers these days. And I mean, off the record, look, if we could get a good teacher influencer, that's one thing. But a lot of these teachers that are influencers, funny enough, they actually tend to be the good teachers. I know that's a hot take. Now, the nurses in the hospitals, like, dog, how can you be hitting the renegade and doing all that stuff? And, you have your geriatric patient bleeding out on the table over there, right? I actually had an example of that over the summer. My eyes were literally going to fall out because I think I swam in a lake and there was some bacteria, and I wear contacts, and my eyes, I was losing my vision. Like, I couldn't see and my eyes were open. I would look in the mirror. I was like, hey man, can I see? Like, I can't see at all, but are my eyes open? And he's like, yeah, man, like they're wide open. So I went to the hospital and I was sitting in this bed, all this stuff was happening. The doctor walks in. I'm in Chicago. The guy looks like Barack Obama. Okay. He was like a spitting image. He's like, well, what's wrong here? Hit the whole Obama thing. And I was like, is this real? Like, where am I right now? Well, I'm in Chicago. It could be. And this guy looked like a spitting image of Obama. And so he was really good. He was a top-notch doctor, right? I think it was Northwestern Medical Center. Great center, by the way. They have to deal with some crazy things. There was this guy that came into the lobby and he was like fighting off security. He was bloodied all over, an African-American male, bloodied all over, just like beating up the security in the hospital. And I'm like, man, like, that must suck. Okay. Being a security guard at a hospital and having to deal with an average Chicago resident. Yeah, that's going to be a tough time. But anyway, getting back to the point, I was like waiting and waiting and waiting. My eyes were basically falling out. It was a pain in my ass. And then I'm like, hey, buddy, can you like, to my friend that was there, hey, can you go out and like look and see if I'm ever going to get taken care of? And there was this nurse who was sitting at her little like stand-up desk, the whole hitting the pose of like, I'm a girl boss. I'm a nurse. I spent 8 years in nursing school. And then I work at Northwestern Hospital in Chicago. Like, cool, good for you. Can I get some help here? Because my eyes are falling out. And so literally she is there hitting a pose of literally just, girl boss pose at the computer, like, scrolling, some BS, spreadsheet. And then she has TikTok on her phone opened up, like scrolling. And it was like this other nurse, like TikTok thing. So I'm like, there's levels to this. Okay. Because one, I'm dying in a hospital bed and there's this nurse outside that's not doing her job. Clearly I'm not having a fun time. And two, she's not even filming TikToks. Okay. She's watching another nurse's TikToks while on the job. This was just something I was just like, wow, great. Okay. Luckily I didn't have to pay that much for it. Bless up. But it was just a horrible experience. Northwestern, though, grade A place. They have a lot of good medical equipment. My eyes are still here. I still can see. That's a good thing, I guess, because that's one of my biggest fears, honestly. Losing vision. I feel like it's a lot of people's biggest fears, because how would that even work? But yeah, no, I think there's just a lot of jobs like this where you can just really dive in and be like, wow, okay, what actually happened to like these areas? And I think teachers are a huge example of that. But I will say when there are good teachers, it can really change someone's lives. So aspire to be a good teacher. If one happens to watch this, get good. Okay. I don't know what to tell you. Just get good and actually teach your students, some meaningful stuff. So, yeah, Nathan Graff is basically a super chatter here. I'm going to start charging you, man. Um, yeah, like a teacher playing Nintendo Switch for an hour, that's like Disney adult stuff, okay? Oh, I'm going to play my Nintendo Switch while I'm actually in class with students, and then I'm going to doom scroll on my phone about Disney characters and feed my lore of these things that don't even exist. That's what you see. Like that's mental illness, okay? Is a Disney adult, that's one of them, okay? A Nintendo Switch player, that's another one of them, okay? I think we could label these as mental illnesses. And then Israel is another mental illness, right? The obsession with that as well. I think you brought up a huge point about that. So yeah, it's just really interesting, like the entire dynamic with a lot of these careers, and it's really up to the individual person, right? Like you don't have to be a bad teacher or a bad nurse. They literally choose it because they know they can get away with it. And that has to do with a lot of private corporations. And getting to private corporations, I want to tell you guys a story. Is I was doing this interview for this local magazine or something, and they're a smaller outlet, and they called me yesterday and they went through an interview that I did with them. And the interview, I mean, he really ran through it. It was so funny. He just said what I said, right? So it sounded like an amazing interview. He's like, "Do you agree with everything Nick Fuentes says?" And he said my answer. And I was like, the only person I agree with everything that he said in human history is Jesus Christ alone. And I was like, wow, that sounded right. That sounded actually correct. That is an objective fact. That's a truth nuke. Okay. That is the biggest truth nuke if I've ever heard one. I love that word, truth nuke. Anyway, and we were talking about the rest of the interview, and he was like, so I want to know if you think this point is correct. And I was like, okay. Like I thought I said something crazy, like actually crazy. And he's like, so do you think that private corporations fund research projects through universities to skew results in order to get a determined outcome? And I was like, man, I was holding back to not say, yeah, is the sky blue as well? Because, yeah, obviously, I mean, private corporations have been doing that forever. We've seen it with, you're probably going to start seeing it with marijuana being declassified, right? The government's going to have an ability to start sponsoring a lot of these studies. Universities are going to be able to start doing studies on weed classification and the effects of it, because now they won't risk losing their federal funding over it. But who knows? Maybe someone will kick that back. Maybe Trump will be like, okay, maybe you can't do all that. But there's a lot of things that are like that situation where, yeah, obviously the results are skewed. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of things in our country that literally should be done a lot differently. And private corporations are usually the ones that fund research studies. I know it's a pretty crazy concept that money just doesn't grow out of thin air or on a tree, but a lot of these teachers will tell you that. Weed literally feeds gender dysphoria and sexuality. Yeah, absolutely. Like it actually does do a lot of these things. And here's the caveat to a lot of people were saying, oh, well, the weed declassification is the worst thing since 9/11 or January 6th or whatever. And I was like, yeah, to an extent, right? Because you're essentially lowering the penalty bar on it, right? That's surface level chud thinking, right? But when you actually ascend and start thinking a little bit higher, okay, because we're in the big 26, you say, okay, maybe these universities can actually do studies that show results that will disprove that will actually bolster the argument of the negative effects of weed. But then I thought back to this conversation, this interview. This is where the story's going of, wait, no, because a lot of these private corporations, especially in the marijuana industry, have been able to grow drastically and already have research teams and they're basically their own pseudo government, right? They're basically on the same level of Venezuela in terms of recognition, right? In the sense that they already have the infrastructure in place to start lobbying and start paying for skewed results. So I'm sure there are going to be some honest studies. I would hope there are, some honest studies that still come from this, but a majority of them are just going to bolster the arguments that weed is positive, weed is this, you should take it all the time. You should take one dose in the morning, one in the evening. I'm sure you'll see that in a couple of years is you should just hit the edible in the morning and hit the weed pen in the evening. That's what'll keep you around till, you're probably 45 and then you can barely even walk. So, yeah. Oh, what's my Cane's order? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Probably the chicken tenders, okay? Probably the chicken tenders. I actually thought about that. I was like, wow, what would my Cane's order be? And then I thought, wait, all they sell is box combos of chicken tenders, okay? So this is the order, okay? And you would know this out of anyone is I think it's a number 3. I think that's is it the 3 or 5 piece tender? And then obviously we get a side of the toast, right? And then obviously we replace the coleslaw with another side of toast. And then you ask for double cane sauce because that cane sauce isn't going to be enough. And this is what I hate with places too. And I don't know if Cane's has started doing this because I haven't been there in a while. But I went to Culver's and they start charging 50 cents per ranch. Like 50 cents per ranch. Like, the little ranch things that you get, the little circular things, their ranch is actually pretty good. So I did pay it. But they start charging 50 cents per sauce now. And I'm like, wow, we're really that influenced by Israel now. Okay. That was my first thought. And then I'm like, okay, guys, like it's not everything's Israel. Okay. I know that's a hot take. Not everything is just, oh, it's Israel's fault. It's Israel this, it's Israel that. So, but I think Israel was behind that one. But yeah, I mean, Cane's order, it's pretty simple, chicken tenders. It's not like they sell anything else. 3 or 5 piece combo, extra toast, extra cane sauce, hold the slaw. Okay. It's pretty simple. Went to a Mexican place and they charged for salsa refills. I know, like, why is this being normalized? Okay. Another thing, I went to another country recently and they charge for water. Like, that's stupid. But it would make sense because I was on an island. You can't just necessarily go get a bottle of water and go fill it up in the ocean and just, put a cap on it. But here is the thing I will say about big bottled water. Okay. They're a problem. They upcharge water costs like 5,000%. Okay. That's not natural. That's an outlier when they just put tap water in it. Okay. So anybody who I'm out in public with and they buy a Dasani water, oh, they're going to hear it. They are going to hear it to hell and back because one, Dasani water has extra amounts of salt in it. And I hear the average, low IQ take of, oh, they put minerals, they put salts in it because that actually refines the flavor and that actually keeps people drinking the water. Yeah, that's about as Israeli owned as it gets. Okay. They put salt in the water, especially Dasani at a higher level. You ever notice why they always have Dasani at sports events? It's maybe so you buy a $11 water more than once there. I know, crazy take. I'm a conspiracy theorist here. And then they put extra amounts of salt in the water and then you drink it. Don't you ever notice you're a little thirstier than when you started drinking it? Like I could go drink a Diet Coke and feel more refreshed than I do drinking a Dasani water. So anyway, we'll, big bottle water can't be talked about too long. I might, that might put my safety in jeopardy. Okay. Big bottle water, you don't mess around with them. So, yeah, like I just hate that, the whole monetizing off of sauces, like really, like shit, I should start charging you a fee when I give you my card so that you can payment process it. Okay. I should open up Square on my phone, charge a 10% card allocation fee or some bullshit and hand it to the minimum wage Mexican at McDonald's and say, no, actually your corporation's going to have to pay that because that's how stupid charging for sauces is, right? Because one, a lot of times these fast food places don't keep inventory over sauces because that's impossible, right? Two, the minimum wage workers steal the sauces all the time, okay? Because guilty. Okay. And three, when you're in that environment, like really, you're gonna profit max essentially the sauces. Like, I'm sorry, I don't want my chicken nuggets dry. Okay. That's just an abomination. Okay. I think I'm just hungry, guys. I didn't even get to get anything this morning because of that whole McDonald's incident. I didn't even get to get a coffee because they can't fix their app. And then the worker, I'm like, hey, can I get some benefit of the doubt? You know, like it says the deal's on my phone, it says everything's all good. And they're like, no, I don't think so. No, I'm actually good. And I'm like, wow. So you're gonna get paid $17.50 an hour regardless if you give me that break or not. That's the big thing I'll say is living in a big city compared to a small town is you got a lot more smaller breaks that make people's days in the small towns, right? You get pulled over going 110 with a bunch of guns strapped to your back. There'll be an officer that'll be like, you gonna shoot me with those guns? Up. Have a good day, sir. Have a good day. I know someone that happened to. I don't want to say his name because, you know, a lot of things can happen. But yeah, like stuff like that happens to people in small towns. And then you go to a big city and you have this fat chud McDonald's worker that doesn't want to get you a 99-cent coffee because you have to go on a show and talk for an hour straight. It is a little bit annoying, I will be honest, but we have to stay positive. I'm still going to get that coffee later on if the app works. And, you know, maybe someone will give me the lucky break. You know, someone could make my day. And, you know, I recommend you all try to make someone else's day. So if you work at a McDonald's or you work somewhere else where you can make someone's day, or at a U-Haul place, you know, make someone's day by just giving them the little breaks, because I would rather explain to my boss, hey, you know, this person asked for something extra and I accommodated that so that I didn't have to put the burden on you, instead of hearing some customer like me bitch about, oh, you know, that's so Israeli influence. I don't want to say the word, but for charging for sauces and not giving me my benefit of the doubt for a coffee in the morning. Anyway, we don't live in a good old boy America anymore. That's all I know. But wow, I have been yapping for an hour and 10 minutes. It feels like a blur every time I do this, especially like now, you know, the third show, third time's a charm, I guess. It feels a little more natural, right? And I'm doing this in a hotel, which is not home field advantage, okay? So seriously looking for anti-Zionist literature, particularly for kids under 10. Any recommendations? Wow. Why would you be looking for that for under 10-year-olds as well? You know, that's the real question. But, you know, there is some literature, you know, written in the 1930s that you can get your hands on. I wouldn't recommend under 10-year-olds reading it, though. And for the record, to keep it off the record, I would recommend using it in a way that's for study, using it in a way that could better yourself, not ruin your outlook of the world. I'd recommend that. And people will misconstrue that and be like, he's recommending Mein Kampf to people and he's saying use it in a positive light. That's not what I said, dog. I said use it in a way that you can study to better your life, just like any other book you'd read. You know, if you're reading one of those trans books of how to have sex with all these different devices, I would hope you're not reading it for pleasure. I hope you're reading it to be like, you know, maybe I don't want my 8-year-old Johnny in school to be looking out to have gay anal sex, you know, right before the lunch break, and he has to go eat his, you know, sanctioned school lunch. That is, you know, the chicken nuggets and the chicken sandwich was so peak back in the day in the school cafeteria. Oh, pardoned. Oh my gosh. That's a long chat to read. Pardon J6er updates. Oh, wait, hold on. Pardon J6er updates. Emily Hernandez / Shane Woods got 10 to 15 years in prison for lethal DUIs. Andrew Johnson charged with sexual abuse of an 11-year-old, and blah, blah, blah. So we have a lib in the chat, everyone. Wow. Okay. So you're going to cherry pick 3 people and say, oh, they did this, they did that after they were pardoned, most likely, or even if it was before they were pardoned, they weren't pardoned for those crimes. Okay. One, two, look at your whole Democrat Party. They all went to the island. They all did things that are regrettable. They all stock trade, insider trade. They all commit crimes. A lot of them have committed those crimes right there, actually, and they don't get prosecuted. And then the second we start prosecuting them, it'll be hell in the streets because, oh, you don't know if that actually was true. Oh, you don't know if Nancy Pelosi was doing this. Oh, you don't know if Eric Swalwell was banging Fang Fang in China. Okay. Or actually committing crimes upon Fang Fang, right? We don't know about that because it's covered up the second it happens. But the second these J6ers get out, you're going to dox their whole family. You're going to dox their whole record. And I'm not defending these guys by any means, obviously. I'm not going to defend if they actually did this stuff, right? That's not what I'm doing. I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy of the stupidity that you're offering. Huh, pardon J6er update. Huh, let me throw a truth nuke at you. No, that truth nuke didn't hit. Okay. And oh wow, USA a few months ago, J6 rioter, blah 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 blah. Huh. What a patriot. Yeah, what have you done to be a patriot? Julia Collins 777. Okay. You're pointing out nothing here. They did this to this person. They did that to that person. What does that have to do with being pardoned for January 6th? Can I ask you that? What does that have to do? Okay, ready? This is going to be a response. It sets a dangerous precedent for if you're going to allow someone who raped a 15-year-old to be pardoned for another crime that was completely separate, that had societal ramifications that were completely different for those crimes. So this is a average low IQ take. Pretty easy to beat, honestly. And yeah, you're such a patriot. Clearly, you are watching this stream on the middle of a day on Tuesday. I guess it is, it is the January 6th anniversary. I forgot Democrats have to go to the Capitol and go on the steps and bow down to Nancy Pelosi while she, wheels out in her like crippled wheelchair and says, buy Palantir stock, everyone. And it's like the Democrats' mecca because they're going on the steps of the Capitol and basically bowing down and throwing flowers and all that. I'm sure they would if they could. I'm sure if, some of the that's how brainwashed that side is if, Eric Swalwell and Cory Booker and Nancy Pelosi and all these, frankly, not smart people were like, we're holding a January 6th vigil on the steps of the Capitol. I'm sure there'd be thousands of people, chuds that work at McDonald's that really don't do too much, that watch average anime and role play on these live streaming platforms, would go to the Capitol, would throw down their knees in front of the Capitol and bow down to Nancy Pelosi. It's just like, it's just such an insane thing. And that's not even crazy to even say out of context, okay? Because there would be people that would go that far. There was people when I was there that was just doing the wildest things. And I'm like, wow, you have one life on this earth and this is how you're choosing to spend it. It's honestly sad. So Julia Collins, keep it coming, but you kind of got destroyed. So, I mean, I wouldn't expect you to. Lib is already gone. Yeah, I know. She already escaped. She went back to, she probably found it on some stupid article too, like some New York Times opinion piece looking January 6th or even ChatGPT, probably one of those. It kind of looked like copy and pasted. Cause yeah, like holy retarded. Anyway, liberals think we're in the Hunger Games. Yeah, pretty much, honestly. It's not really just libs versus conservatives, okay? And that's the big distinction is when I say the left, obviously it's a left way of thinking. It's an ideologically motivated philosophical view of like how you look at the country, of how you look at this entire viewpoint that you're living, the moral authority that guides you, all of that, because they tend to have a lack of religion. They tend to have a lack of grounding in religion. So Anyway, I just had to clear that up because people are going to be like, he's a conservative talk piece. Well, no, we can dive into an episode. There will be an episode upcoming where there are going to be a lot of things I'm carrying into the conservative argument regarding obviously foreign influence. We've already touched on that, but even domestic policies, right? There are a lot of things that we need to fix. And I'm not just going to talk about infrastructure, I'm going to talk about societally and especially in the religious sect. Now, I'm not as well versed in that, but I know the societal ramifications of what the moral authority outlook of this whole country could be. So, anyway, this stream has been an amazing time. I don't think there's any better way to celebrate January 6th than this. You know, one of my old professors used to say January 6th was his favorite holiday, was his favorite day. And, you know, honestly, it's almost there. It's almost there. But he said that because his birthday was on January 6th. I think he really meant it because it's January 6th, right? But I would like to thank everybody who is watching. You know, ones and twos amounts of people who are watching the stream and the one liberal who popped in for about 5 seconds. But the VOD will be out after this. I'm sure there will be some clips from this regarding what we talked about with Venezuela, what we talked about with January 6th, my rant about teachers. That was something. That was something I didn't even think I would talk about. But honestly, it's just true. Okay. And I think there's really no one that's going to be like, oh, that's such a wrong take. No one's going to say that. And so again, thank you all for watching. This was the third episode of The Common Cause. Pretty much the schedule of this show is whenever I want to go live, to be honest with you. It's been a pretty crazy schedule with everything. It's been a crazy schedule with Off the Record. So I'll let everyone know when we're going live next. I'll probably put out a reel on all the social medias about it. This one was kind of a little more impromptu because obviously we have to celebrate January 6th somehow. So this is how you do it. This is the biggest party. This is the biggest party in the country right now. Okay. The only ones that could top me are the Democrats on the Capitol Hill steps. Okay. But again, thank you very much. This was The Common Cause. My name is Carson Carpenter, and Jesus first and America only will guide this country to greatness. Thank you all. God bless you. It was a pleasure talking to you on this wonderful January 6th, 2026. Wow, how do I end stream? Okay, wait, play. I got to play an outro, okay? You guys got to watch this.